Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my quarterback strength of schedule for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're going to be talking about the impact of matchups throughout the entire 2021 season. Regardless of which quarterback you have in your starting role, there's always going to be the impact of matchups, whether they are advantageous or disadvantageous for that specific player. What I wanted to go ahead and do on today's episode is, of course, talk about said matchups and see who has the best overall schedule in terms of the defenses they play. Of course, we've seen a storied history of defenses giving up a lot of points to opposing quarterbacks on a weekly basis in 4-point per passing touchdown formats, and I'll be mentioning that. But I also want to take into account the variables that have changed going into the 2021 season, because the quarterback position has to deal with not only corners, safeties, linebackers in coverage, but they have to deal with a pass rush that is coming in their direction. And based on the play of their offensive line, that is going to potentially impact them this upcoming season. So we'll talk about the matchups they're going to face, the potential of a quarterback based on said matchups. That is pretty much the objective for today. Before we begin talking about, of course, the strength of schedule at the quarterback position, I want to thank you guys for the incredible support. We are so close to getting to 37,000 subscribers. So if you have not yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community. We're going to be making fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2021 season. If you're trying to get a leg up on the rest of your league, this is the place to do it. Banking content as much as I possibly can and stuff like this that is, yes, going to take a lot of time out of my day to go ahead and calculate it, but it's valuable information that, in my opinion, will impact your potential for this upcoming season and hopefully win you a 2021 fantasy football championship. Again, for those of you who have already come out, commented down below, I do appreciate you guys smashing that like button every single day. That does make a huge difference in terms of the channel's growth and it being suggested to others. So I do appreciate that without a doubt. Now, for those of you who are looking to support even more and get an extra leg up on your league, I have to mention that Andrew Kirchhoff's 2021 fantasy football draft guide is now available. For those of you who are trying to find this, go down to the description of the video. There are two links there, one to my Patreon, in which you'll get other services along with the 2021 fantasy football draft guide, or you can go to the website. Either way, I do appreciate you guys' support. For those of you who have already gone out in droves and gone ahead and picked up Andrew Kirchhoff's 2020 fantasy football draft guide. Of course, I've been updating it as of the last couple of days because there have been a lot of injuries regarding a lot of running backs and, kind of paradigm shifts in terms of players being traded. A lot of things are going down, but we're a couple weeks away to the beginning of the season. I think we have enough time to be able to manage all of this and be able to create some great analysis regarding these players. So make sure you pick that up for those of you who are interested. Now, let's talk about the quarterback position, of course, because that's what we're here for. We want to see exactly what the quarterback position is capable of going into the 2021 season based on their matchups. Of course, we want to take into account that players like Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, these top-tier-esque quarterbacks that have a lot of experience or have shown to be the most proficient or consistent quarterbacks over the last couple of years, they're matchup proof. And at times, yes, there are some matchups that might tie them down. For example, Aaron Rodgers taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers during the regular season last year. That was something of a difficulty for him. Or we've even seen Patrick Mahomes struggle against the Denver Broncos, and they've got one of the better secondaries in the National Football League as they continue to retool their defense and continue to make it more and more difficult for him on a yearly basis. So regardless of these quarterbacks being studs and guys that you're going to potentially start every single week, there are some matchups that you might want to go ahead and lean in a different direction with. I'm not saying you're not going to start Patrick Mahomes, but if in fact you have Joe Burrow as your starting guy and you see another person on the waiver wire playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars in that given week, and Joe Burrow's got to take on the Baltimore Ravens, right? We want to go ahead and potentially pivot from that, find other players, add them to our rosters based on those matchups, and play matchups to find ourselves the most beneficial product and overall fantasy point contribution from our team. So let's go ahead and, of course, start talking about the statistics that are currently on screen, beginning with the one that is directly to the right of me, titled 2020 Fantasy Points Allowed versus Quarterbacks. Now, what exactly does this mean, Andrew? Well, I talk about this every single week during my quarterback episode throughout the entire season, but just to give you some more perspective, this is how many points defenses were allowing opposing quarterbacks on a weekly basis in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. So, for example, the number one team last season, or the best matchup for quarterbacks last season, was the Detroit Lions, giving up 24.18 fantasy points per game on a weekly basis. In comparison to that, all the way on the bottom, we have the Los Angeles Rams, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Washington Football Team, defenses that we typically didn't want to play our quarterbacks against because we knew they had overall incredible defenses, whether that was in the secondary or their pass rush pressure that was going to impact the play at the quarterback position. So just to give you some perspective, that was the 2020 total contribution from quarterbacks against defenses on average. Now, if you went ahead and took those numbers and from those 1 through 32 ranks, threw it into a spreadsheet and applied it to our 2021 upcoming schedule and found that if you played against the Detroit Lions, you were given a 1 versus the Rams a 32, the 2021 strength of schedule at the quarterback position would look like potentially what we have on the very right side of the screen. Now, unfortunately, we can't use these numbers as a pure dictator of what we can anticipate this upcoming season because, like I mentioned before, there are different variables, players, rookies, free agents that have moved from team to team, even injuries that are going to impact defenses this upcoming season that may have existed last year but aren't going to continue this upcoming season. With that being said, if we still applied the points allowed to opposing quarterbacks to the 2021 season, we would find that the New England Patriots, Pittsburgh Steelers, Denver Broncos, Miami Dolphins, and the Indianapolis Colts would be at the very top in terms of the easiest strength of schedule overall, as their average score versus these defenses would be in the 12 to 14 range. This is a statistic that I'm going to refer back to because it is going to play a role in the entire scheme of this. But what I wanted to continue on to is talking about the implementation of those players that are the variables that we aren't accounting for when we talk about the 2020 season. When we talk about the 2021 defenses, as you can see immediately to the right of me, I went ahead and I compiled the grades of pass coverage defenders, whether that is in the secondary or in the second level in terms of linebackers and coverage linebackers in specific, because I don't want to go ahead and include Chandler Jones because he is playing defensive end majority of the time, and though he can drop back into coverage, I wanted to specifically talk about coverage linebackers, those who are immediate threats to the quarterback's main scoring format, which is their arm. So as I compiled these statistics, I found the averages of these defenders in terms of their total pass coverage grade, and we found the results accordingly, having the Denver Broncos as the best overall team in terms of total average pass coverage grade as we approach the 2021 fantasy football season. Now, on the very bottom of this list, it shouldn't surprise you, defenses like the Detroit Lions, Las Vegas Raiders, Houston Texans are among the worst in the National Football League in terms of average grades because their secondaries aren't good, and their linebacking core in terms of coverages haven't been good enough to at least even them out in these rankings. So with this applied, if you were to take this and inject it into our 2021 fantasy football season, of course, the Denver Broncos being the most difficult, giving them a tougher grade, and the Detroit Lions being the easiest, and applied that accordingly, we would find that it is a coincidence, but the Denver Broncos quarterbacks would have the easiest strength of schedule going into the 2021 season, followed by the Washington Football Team, New York Giants, Miami Dolphins, etc. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I want to refer back to the statistics on the prior page because I went ahead and I took both of these into account. I took into account the production of quarterbacks versus defenses in 2020 because that is our most recent history of what we can anticipate, along with the potential of grades going into the 2021 season, applied them together, and figured out that this upcoming season's 2021 strength of schedule at the quarterback position would look like this. We have the Denver Broncos, New England Patriots, Miami Dolphins, Washington Football Team, and Indianapolis Colts, which is often similar to both the graphs before, but it's because of the fact that regardless of what we've seen this offseason, a lot of the impact that we're going to see is mainly already there. The structures of our defenses, whether it is Denver or Pittsburgh, they're already there. Bringing in a couple players here and there isn't going to make a giant difference in terms of the overall productivity of that defense because they're typically going to stay in that same mold unless we see a complete shift in terms of players being traded and a team trying to tank this upcoming season, which of course we've seen in the past from like the Jacksonville Jaguars. A couple years back, 2017, they were a prominent defense, unfortunately had to give away all their pieces because players weren't happy, and they just tanked, and they've now just become one of the worst defenses in the National Football League in terms of being able to at least stop offenses. They're not capable of doing it. But with that being said, as you can see on screen, this is the current 2021 strength of schedule for the quarterback position. The thing that, of course, a lot of us are immediately looking at is the fact that a lot of our top tier quarterbacks aren't in this upper echelon of strength of schedule, and that shouldn't really bother us. The strength of schedule at the quarterback position isn't really for quarterbacks like Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray. I'm not worried about those guys regardless of what defense they play against. And though Kyler Murray in his career has struggled against the Rams, whenever he's gone against them, he's also had injuries against them, so his averages are dropped. But just taking into account the matchups this upcoming season, the thing that I really think that the 2021 strength of schedule of the quarterback position points out is the quarterbacks that we should potentially be having as our second string guys that are going to have really advantageous stretches of time in which maybe they go ahead and pose a better opportunity for your team to score more fantasy points in a given week, or if in fact they have a great strength of schedule. For example, the Miami Dolphins or the Washington football team. We have Tua and Fitzpatrick both playing on the same team last year, but this upcoming season individually are going to potentially play 16 games a pop for us in fantasy football. The question is which one of the two can potentially have themselves great season. I think both of them are capable of doing it, and if they are going to have stretches of time this year where they are going to play against defenses that don't have great secondaries and they can't survive in the pocket, because I know their offensive lines aren't the greatest in terms of pass blocking, which we'll talk about specifically in a bit, it could be something that we want to invest in. And that's why I wanted to show this. Now, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, we have the Seattle Seahawks with the most difficult schedule this year. And that being said, Russell Wilson in the last 4 to 5 years has been one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League. And that's an irrefutable statement. I mean, just going back to his rookie season, the guy's been a top 12 fantasy quarterback every single year in a 4-point per passing touchdown league. So that in itself gives me confidence in Russell Wilson. But yes, there's going to be some struggles. I mean, the division that they play in isn't the easiest. Obviously, playing against Arizona, the Rams, and San Francisco's defense, that's going to be tough. There's a reason why a lot of the teams in the NFC West, in terms of their upcoming strength of schedule, are going to be in the tougher end of this spectrum. So again, when you have to play against those teams, it's obviously going to be difficult in comparison. But other teams down here, Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers, not worried about it. Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson, not concerned at all. Tennessee Titans and Ryan Tannehill, I'm okay with that. Arizona Cardinals, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Dallas Cowboys, the Chargers, these are all quarterbacks that are ranked within the top 8 of the position for a reason. Is because regardless of what they're going to face this upcoming season, they're going to produce on a consistent basis. But on the other end of the spectrum, when we look at the fact that Patrick Mahomes has the 13th easiest schedule, and he is by far and away, based on my calculations, the most consistent quarterback since 2018 in terms of overall productivity on a per game basis, it just continues to just kind of make the rich even richer. A statistic that I wanted to kind of go over, because while I was doing my research, I realized this in the last couple of days. Patrick Mahomes last season and the year before, so 2019 and 2020, had the most difficult schedules at the quarterback position in terms of strength of schedule when I was doing my calculations in years past. This upcoming year, he's got one of the easier ones. Of course, he has to play against Denver twice, which is always difficult, but outside of that, he is really going to have himself an advantageous year in terms of overall matchups, and he's going to be able to pick apart a lot of defenses. That's why you see a lot of Patrick Mahomes come off the board early in your drafts, because what he's going to be facing this year is relatively simple in comparative to years past, where he's, of course, had to go against a lot tougher defenses on a yearly basis. Putting that in perspective, of course, the statistics on screen can guide you in the right direction. I wanted to continue on and talk about spectrums of time, specifically the first 2 halves of our regular fantasy football season, beginning with weeks 1 through 7 and then weeks 8 through 14. After week 14, we have the fantasy football playoffs that we're going to talk about, but there's 2 halves to every year. And of course, you have to be able to, if not win, majority of your games in the first half, be able to come back in the second half of the season and set yourself up for success. And whether or not you've succeeded in the first half, maybe even potentially set yourself up for the fantasy football playoffs based on potential matchups. So as we move on, we'll see, of course, the strength of schedule from weeks 1 through 7. As you can see on screen, I've gone ahead and I figured out the strength of schedule. And what do we have here? The Philadelphia Eagles, Baltimore Ravens, Miami Dolphins, they are at the top of the list in terms of having the easiest strength of schedule. And it really isn't a surprise when we just look at their schedules overall. Let's look at the Baltimore Ravens. They begin with, of course, Las Vegas, which, I mean, they're playing the Raiders, guys. Okay, then they play against the Kansas City Chiefs. They've played against them in the last couple of years. Lamar Jackson still produces very well. Then they play against the Detroit Lions. Wow, okay. Those are 3 games in which regardless of what happens in KC, that's going to be a shootout because both teams are going to be producing a lot. Detroit and Las Vegas, those are huge weeks. He's going to be putting up some insane numbers. That's to say the very least. Then he gets to play against the Denver Broncos, the Indianapolis Colts, which in my opinion, they are tough for defenses overall. And then you get the Los Angeles Chargers, who have shown that they aren't the greatest in terms of total coverage. Their linebacker play in terms of coverage, not great. And then the Cincinnati Bengals, which of course Lamar Jackson, every year, I think he's averaged like some insane number, like 28 fantasy points per game against them in his career thus far as a starting quarterback of the Baltimore Ravens since 2018, week 11. In week 11, in fact, he played against Cincinnati Bengals. These are all stats that are on top of my head, guys. I'm just trying to spew them out as much as I possibly can to give you some more context. But those are great games, to be honest. I mean, of course, Philadelphia playing against Atlanta, Dallas, Kansas City, Carolina, Tampa Bay, Las Vegas. I know the San Francisco 49ers are a tougher schedule, but when I think about the Philadelphia Eagles and I think about what their potential is this year, it's a matter of potentially being in negative game scripts and Jalen Hurts being given the reins to the offense and saying, you're down 14 points for the rest of the game, just go and throw the whole time. Run, use your legs, score as many points as you can. And I think that could very well benefit him this year based on the strength of schedule. Of course, we have other quarterbacks like Tua, potentially Cam Newton or Mac Jones, depending on how that thing pans out. Kirk Cousins, Justin Herbert at the beginning of the season coming out hot. Now, of course, he plays against Washington, which is definitely going to be tough. But Dallas, Kansas City, the Las Vegas Raiders, Cleveland, if they haven't improved by them, it could be taken advantage of. And the Baltimore Ravens. Good matchups overall across the board. Now, the reason the Seattle Seahawks overall in terms of the 2021 fantasy football strength of schedule at the quarterback position are going to be up against it. If we go to the bottom of the screen, to start out this upcoming season, they play against Indianapolis. Tennessee is a cakewalk. Minnesota can be a cakewalk. The San Francisco 49ers, Russell Wilson's played well against them every time in his career. The Rams are definitely difficult. The Pittsburgh Steelers are difficult, and so are the New Orleans Saints. So we have 4 out of the first 7 matchups in which we could see Russell Wilson be a little bit less effective than other quarterbacks, but I still have confidence in him to produce on a weekly basis. I mean, when we looked at Russell Wilson's career, just in the past 2 seasons, he's come out of the blocks 100% better than he's ever looked. Whenever he starts a season, when nobody really has much film on them, and they're obviously trying to catch up and defend these threats from the Seattle Seahawks on a weekly basis, Russell Wilson in the past 2 seasons has started his first 8 games of the season at a significantly high fantasy point per game level than the second half of the season. He typically tails off in terms of his overall productivity. So I still have confidence in him to come out striking and putting up a lot of points. Now, of course, the Green Bay Packers, they're going to have themselves their hands full with some tougher schedules, but overall, they still have a couple games in there which are really beneficial. And in other games like New Orleans, Pittsburgh, I'm not really worried about Aaron Rodgers against these defenses. He's far too good and far too secure of a quarterback for me to ever, bat an eye at those matchups on a weekly basis. So in terms of a couple things that we need to take into account, there are bye weeks in week 7 and week 6. So if in fact you have a quarterback that is going to be in that range, there are 10 teams that are going to have a bye week by week 7. So if you fall into that range, you certainly need to go ahead and select and have a second quarterback on roster that is going to have a great matchup this upcoming season. Let's point some out just as of right now, week 6 and week 7, guys that you can already have on roster that can help you right away, that you want to go ahead and grab right now, potentially during your draft. So in order to clarify, in week 6, we have the Atlanta Falcons, New Orleans Saints, New York Jets, and the San Francisco 49ers all on bye week. So when I go ahead and I look at the schedule for the 2021 season in week 6, we see the Miami Dolphins playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'll take Tua there if he is trending in the right direction by the time we get there. I like Carson Wentz playing against the Texans. I like Joe Burrow playing against the Lions. Again, those are good matchups because those are defenses, the Jaguars, the Houston Texans, and the Detroit Lions, that we've seen year over year struggle. I even like Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater playing against the Raiders at home. Those are great matchups overall, and potentially guys you want to go ahead and have on roster if in fact the quarterbacks that you have are from one of the teams, the Atlanta Falcons, Saints, Jets, and 49ers. But typically, the only quarterback that may be started on your team from that group is maybe Matt Ryan, but even then, he's not even a top 12 guy. So you may not even have to, worry about that going into this, specific week. Now, when we get to week 7, that is when the bye weeks really start to hit. We have 6 bye weeks in that week. The Dallas Cowboys, Buffalo Bills, Jaguars, Chargers, Vikings, and Steelers. Now, when we go ahead and look at the potential matchups in that given week, there are games like the Los Angeles Rams playing against the Lions, which of course you want to have Stafford on your team in that given week. The revenge game in LA, my God, is that going to be incredible. But other than that, I like the Patriots playing against the Jets in that given week. I mean, maybe if in fact Tua again is on fire at home against the Atlanta Falcons, not a bad matchup there. Otherwise, all of the better matchups in that given week, we have Baltimore versus against Cincinnati. Lamar's already gone. Jalen Hurts playing against the Raiders, he'll be gone. Kyler versus Houston, he'll be gone. You know, like a lot of the better matchups that we want are not going to be there on the table. Maybe Fitz versus the Green Bay Packers. If Green Bay gets ahead early, you'll see Fitz just continue to air it out and find a lot of production there. So that's what I wanted to just go ahead and go over. Let's move on to weeks 8 through 14, giving us some more perspective as to which quarterbacks have the better matchups in the second half of our season, trending towards the fantasy football playoffs. We have the Indianapolis Colts, Washington football team, Denver Broncos, New Orleans Saints, and the New York Giants. Again, teams that don't have quarterbacks that we're going after, and they're not actively being drafted very high either. I mean, in terms of off the top of my head, Drew Lock and Carson Wentz, I mean, these aren't quarterbacks that I'm expecting, you know, Daniel Jones, Cam Newton. I'm not expecting them to be world beaters this year. Like, they might surprise me, but at this current moment in time, they're not even in my top 15 quarterback rankings for reasons because they haven't shown a level of consistency to earn that. Now, of course, the Indianapolis Colts playing against Tennessee, the Jets, the Jaguars, the Buffalo Bills are going to be a tougher defense, Tampa Bay, Houston, and then they get the Week 14 bye. I don't mind that at all if Carson Wentz is even able to do anything. That's a run-first offense. They have a rotation of players in terms of receivers and tight ends. I don't even know if Carson Wentz will be healthy by then. I know he's back from his injury, already practicing. So is Nelson, their left guard. So there's a lot of potential for, you know, the uprise of this Colts offense. But it's nothing that makes me want to really go ahead and get after these players. Now, of course, like I mentioned, the bye weeks in weeks 1 through 7, weeks 8 through 14, all other 22 teams in the National Football League are going to have bye weeks in this 7-week span. So we have to go ahead and just look at which quarterbacks have the best stretches of potential games coming down the line. I look at the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't mind Joe Burrow versus the Jets, Cleveland Browns, and Las Vegas Raiders from weeks 8 through 11. Those are great. I know he has a bye week in the middle there, but Joe Burrow in those 3 matchups, I don't mind that in any capacity ever. So if in fact he's going to be, you know, fully healthy by then, have more confidence in his knee, maybe even with the wide receiver core, he'll again, you know, get a little bit more of a rapport there and experience. I don't mind tapping into that by then. Now, unfortunately, when we look up and down this board trying to kind of decipher everything, there are quarterbacks like Justin Herbert who are going to have, you know, a tough time playing against New England in week 8. Of course, playing against New England last year was not good for him. Bill Belichick versus rookie quarterbacks, we all know the record there. He dominates rookie quarterbacks. Zach Wilson is certainly going to struggle against Bill Belichick this year. He definitely throws a lot at rookie quarterbacks, a lot of hidden coverages and things that they have to adapt to on the fly. Regardless, of course, we have the Baltimore Ravens down there. They've got tougher matchups. Honestly, when I look at the Baltimore Ravens matchups, Minnesota doesn't bother me. Miami doesn't bother me. Chicago doesn't bother me. Cleveland doesn't bother me. But based on how teams have looked in terms of their new roster construction, especially the Cleveland Browns in terms of their secondary, it should be quote-unquote more difficult. I don't see it as such. I think that the Cleveland Browns are going to, you know, not be that good of a defense. They do have a good pass rush, and they have brought in good corners and safeties. You know, they get Grant Delpit back that he didn't even play last year because of the season-ending injury. So, again, there's a lot of things to take into account. Do not go ahead and too heavily focus on the negatives here. We want to just look towards the positive matchups this upcoming season. Now, we go ahead and potentially close out here in terms of the schedule for this season with the fantasy football playoffs, seeing that the San Francisco 49ers, Denver Broncos, Detroit Lions, Arizona Cardinals, and Jacksonville Jaguars are at the top of the list. Now, if we, you know, kind of remember yesterday's wide receiver episode, if you guys haven't checked that out already, go ahead and potentially go check that out. It's a lot of good information in terms of wide receiver play, specifically the San Francisco 49ers wide receivers, who they also similarly had the easiest strength of schedule in terms of the fantasy football playoffs. Again, playing against Atlanta, Tennessee, and Houston are some of the easiest matchups. Anytime a team this upcoming season is going to play against all 4 defenses from the AFC South, which, you know, of course, entails the Tennessee Titans, Houston Texans, Jacksonville Jaguars, and Indianapolis Colts, that is going to significantly drop the difficulty of their upcoming schedule because, again, playing against Houston, Tennessee, and Jacksonville, their defense can't stop a soul. Now, hopefully Tennessee is going to figure it out this year, but I mean, I don't think it's going to be a year one turnaround all of a sudden that they can cover people. I don't think that's going to be the case. So as of right now, when we look at that schedule, if that's going to be Trey Lance in weeks 15, 16, and 17, then hopefully, by at least halfway through the season, we have an indication as to when he's going to be given the starting spot, if he's ever. And if not, maybe Jimmy Garoppolo could deliver for us throughout that span of time, because those are fantastic matchups to say the very least. Now, the next team underneath that, Denver Broncos playing against Cincinnati, Las Vegas, Los Angeles Chargers. We'll take that. I mean, honestly, if Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater is an efficient enough quarterback in terms of fantasy production, then we can, at least rely there. But if there's no reliability to be had there, then we're just going to go ahead and ignore it by then. A couple other quarterbacks that we may be looking to potentially stream during our fantasy football playoffs. Again, the Washington football team with Ryan Fitzpatrick, Philadelphia, Dallas, Philadelphia. I like that a lot. I know Philadelphia's got a, overall better pass rush than a lot of teams in the National Football League, which we'll get to in a moment. But in terms of coverages, they're going to be up against it. That's tough for them, to say the very least. There are a lot of streaming potential options, guys, that by the time we get to this point, it will be clear as to who we're going to be potentially picking up and starting over our guys. Just wanted to give you some perspective and context as to what I'm currently predicting going into this upcoming season. Now, the last thing that I wanted to mention, something that I've continued to point at and say we're going to mention that in a bit, is overall pass rush. I wanted to account for this, and though I couldn't account for it in terms of the overall strength of schedule, I wanted to go ahead and just determine which offensive line is going to be protecting their quarterback at the highest level in comparison to all in the National Football League this upcoming season. When we take into account the offensive line pass blocking grades of 2020, apply them into the 2021 season, of course, using the averages for rookies that are being applied into new teams, along with the overall pass rush grades of defensive front fives or fours. Again, depending on what kind of a defensive line or you're playing with, sometimes there's outside linebackers, sometimes there's nose tackles that are left on the field to pass rush. So I wanted to take into account there. Don't worry, I've kind of made sure the denominator is, safe and sound and everything has been squared away. As you can see on screen, to the left side of it, we have the 2021 defensive pass rushes. These are the average grades of all 4 to 5 potential pass rushing fronts of these respective teams. Of course, the Pittsburgh Steelers and Tampa Bay Buccaneers being number 1 and 2 should be no surprise. We got guys like TJ Watt, of course, Shaq Barrett getting after the quarterback position on a weekly basis, along with other incredible players, Stephon Tuitt, Hayward, Ndamukong Suh, Vita Vea. I mean, they're Jason Pierre-Paul. I mean, we've got some stacked defensive lines there. Of course, the Carolina Panthers, they got themselves a couple youngsters that are getting up in there. The Washington football team, of course, the reigning rookie of the defensive rookie of the year there. So, again, these are the pass rush grades for all these teams respectively. You can see on the very bottom, we don't really see much of a pass rush from Houston, Cincinnati. New England hopefully will improve this year with players being brought back. But even then, I still think they're going to struggle in terms of pass rush overall. But going into this upcoming season, I also wanted to take into account the 2021 offensive line pass blocking grades. As you can see, last season, the Cleveland Browns were at the top of the list in terms of being the best pass blocking offensive line and could potentially continue as such this upcoming year, followed by the Green Bay Packers, Arizona Cardinals, Baltimore Ravens, and Kansas City Chiefs. Interestingly enough, we got some of the top quarterbacks up there, but somehow, some way, Baker Mayfield has landed himself one of the best offensive lines in the National Football League, and yet we don't talk about him in fantasy. Hopefully, he can do what he did at the back end of last season. If you guys don't remember, Baker Mayfield was actually a pretty good quarterback at the back end of the season once they kind of got into that groove and they were beginning to win games on a consecutive level. I know they had a couple games there where all of their wide receivers were out in a given week and they lost to the Jets and it was tough, but overall, Baker Mayfield was the number 8 overall quarterback from weeks 12 through 17 of the 2020 season. He was averaging, 20.52 fantasy points per game. So we've seen some promise out of Baker Mayfield in the last couple years. Maybe he could take the next level this year. But when you go ahead and you apply both of these, pass rush versus pass blocking, squads against one another, and you apply it to the 2021 season, as a whole, what I found was that the Cleveland Browns was, of course, the best pass blocking team, but overall, based on the pass rushers that they were going to face this year, are still going to have a positive impact in terms of their overall protection schemes for their quarterback. While on the other end of the spectrum, I mean, Daniel Jones is going to be in shambles. He does not have an offensive line. I think whoever plays quarterback for the Chicago Bears is certainly going to struggle at that. The Atlanta Falcons really haven't improved their offensive line. I know they have a couple guys there that are still trying to, build off of their rookie years, but it's just, it really hasn't produced much in the last couple of years. Minnesota, they don't have a great pass blocking offensive line, but luckily for them, they get to enable the fact that they're going to use a lot of play action because of how much of a threat they are in the run game. But just giving you some perspective, only 10 teams this year have potential positive impact in terms of pass blocking and protecting their quarterbacks, while all other teams are going to be up against it because the pass rush is certainly on its way. Just wanted to put that into the universe, give you guys some perspective there. This took a lot of stat breaking down. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you went ahead and did so, make sure you click that like button down below. We'll be talking about tight ends tomorrow. Of course, if you haven't subscribed already, guys, we're making fantasy football content like this throughout the entirety of the 2021 season. Again, these are things that a lot of people don't want to potentially go after and look into, but there is a huge potential market for upside when we talk about matchups and exploiting said matchups. These are things that I want to focus on, give you some more perspective, and help us win some 2021 fantasy football championships. Thank you everybody for watching. I do appreciate you guys' continued support and watching till the end of the video. Really does help out a lot. Until tomorrow, we'll of course be talking about tight ends. Have a good day, and I'll see you guys. Peace.